Good morning, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I've got a mega influencer for the audience today, Kurt Uhlir from Georgia, and he is the king of scaling companies, and he has written books, he's speaking, and he's got so much experience in raising capital and exits, and I'm really happy to have him on to add value to the audience. Kurt, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Briefly introduce yourself, and I'm excited to dive into the questions.
Yeah, so you mentioned king of scaling companies. Thanks to a mentor of mine at a company that we sold to Oracle after it had raised a little more than $30 million. Had named me that after I made some poor decisions, I would say, in my life. I've been an entrepreneur at times. I do starting companies, but I had gone and started one of the first influencer marketing platforms and done quite well with it. But it was difficult at home, and that may be part of our story that we'll talk through. And I came back to him. I'm like, look, we've raised a bunch of money in the West Coast, and we've got lighthouse customers, all these reasons that people from the outside would say it's successful. And I'm like, it's hard and difficult. And here's some things I've seen internal, which I'm not sure about morally with some people on my team. And I'm like, why is this so difficult? And he was like, you shouldn't have done this. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, look, every time in your career before this, he goes, you were a scaler. I hired you to help scale our company, and you decided to go be a founder and start something new. And he's like, that's okay, but that's not you. You're a diehard operator. You're the king of scaling companies. That's why I hired you. And I was like, everything just crystallized. And I was like, that makes so much sense. And so since then, that's what I've focused on directly. And so, yeah, we can talk about it, but I've been part of more than 60, maybe more than 80 funding rounds and or exits, a large IPO, a multi-billion-dollar exit. So that's what I like to do really well as helping individuals, whether they're individual contributors or people leading small general contracting teams or big companies, figure out what leadership actually looks like.
Yeah. And a lot of guests, they come onto the show, either they're promoting a book or product. Your purpose for coming on the podcast is different. It's to add value. What do people come to you for besides the scaling, and what do you do in your day to help people solve their problems?
In my day-to-day, I'm actually chief marketing officer for one of the largest real estate portals for consumers. And so we a company called Easy Home Search. And so I both help grow that company as well as just like Zillow or Redfin, the huge business to business side. And so we help people out there. So that's my day-to-day. But my give back is really what we're doing right here. You mentioned I write a lot. I'm a paid keynote speaker around the world. And I have failed so many times personally. And some of that has helped me figure out how to scale better. But I've screwed up my personal life and companies and business and the lives of people that have worked for me. And a lot of how I figured that out was by hitting bottom and bouncing. But a lot of that was for mentors giving back. And so much of that is like I write in the evening after my family goes to bed. I get on podcasts and carve out time to talk with people like you that have large audiences as part of really trying to help other people avoid being shot with those arrows that I have, and or realize that, hey, especially like leading teams or companies, you may think being in like an authoritative leader is the best way to do that. But I have the wounds and scars to show that, no, like I've done that. I've been successful. I've been a lot more successful when I found a different way to lead. And at the end of the day, even when you fire people, they'll still talk to you if you lead a better way.
Interesting. And so, like a lot of the audience, they would love to be in your shoes and just be part of IPOs and exits. And it was really interesting because I was talking with my colleague over the just lunch the other day, and he wants to take his company IPO. And then I was talking to another guest. It was like, are you really sure you want to give your company to venture capital and have them destroy your company? So is it worth it to go through all of that? What would you talk about people that really want to aspire to be in your position?
I think the biggest thing that everybody needs to think about ahead of time is, what does reality actually look like on the other side? And so keep in mind that, as you mentioned, some of the people that, if they're on the other side of there, most of the people that have raised venture capital money and had a big exit, the view that you hear from them is either been shaped through multiple PR people, helped shape through the PR people at their venture firms, or you're looking at the winners as well, and you're not seeing the 98% of people that took the same path and failed. They're usually not out there telling those stories. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with working at public companies, but reality doesn't always look like the party that you see advertised in the brochure. And so, hey, like I kind of tell people, if you could ever avoid raising money, you probably want to do that. But let's walk through why. There's nothing wrong with raising money, but the moment that you raise money as like venture capital money, what you realize is you were really good probably starting the company and getting to $1 million or 10 million or even $50 million. You're probably really good because you have ADHD or you're a really good operator and you're good at being your own boss. And the moment that you write a check to most people outside of the family office, what happens is you get a boss and you get a clock that you didn't intend. And so like, it's really clear from the public perspective. I've been at public companies, but it's like, you're usually managing towards quarterly numbers. It's rare to have something like a Tesla where people are like, let's just see where this thing goes in 5 to 10 years. And so those quarterly numbers matter. And then a lot of bad decisions have to be made to hit quarterly and annual numbers. The same thing happens from a venture fund. A fund writes you a check, and most of those funds are going to have a 5 to 7 year promise basically that they made to their investors that they're going to pay it back. If they're already 3 years into their fund and they write you a check, that means then that you've got 4 years tops before they expect you to be sold to somebody else so they can get their money back. And so they may seem like a great relationship then, but as that clock starts ticking, they're going to be being like, where's my money? And it's transparent if they tell you that, but a lot of them won't be. A lot of private equity funds won't. And so I think people need to be aware of that. There's nothing wrong with raising money. I speak to a lot of private equity firms. I've taken 2 stints off in my life where I've just been a fractional, basically chief executive officer or CMO for some of those. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like even in the PE world, there are people that have that time horizon. And then there are some private equity firms that will act more like a family office that says, look, we have an anticipated time of return, but like you need to check with the companies they've invested in. But because some of them will say this and it's not true, but many will say, but if we get a company that could go public, we'll hold on to that, forgetting what our return rate is. And so I think that's just what people need to be aware of is what does it actually look like if you take that check? And most of us don't think about that.
Yeah. The other question is, because you mentioned the difference between you had someone early on, a mentor, tell you you're great at scaling. What are the skill sets that make founders successful and the skill sets that make people that scale companies successful? How are those different?
Yeah, the founder I find often is much more like most all of their life. Often they may be just really good at their job, but it's rare. I see much more blue collar jobs at that point where you're a really good plumber and then you start growing that. But especially like in technology or services and larger things, they're like the person that I like going hiking, but I'm not going to be the person with the machete carving out part of the forest. And so that's the entrepreneur. That's the founder. The founder is really good at going into complete chaos and making stuff go, getting cash flow positive. They're often better at the specific roles in their company than anybody that they hire, which is also why they were able to start early. There's nothing wrong with that. But they're often so focused on like the blood dripping from their mouth from the next sale that it hurts them from growing, which happens before scaling to me. And so often most founders, they'll be really good at maybe hopefully getting to a cash flow positive and net earnings, but then they're going to start to tap out. And it's going to happen at different levels, but it's rare for me to find a founder that could make a SaaS company grow past the 10, maybe even 25 million a year in revenue. It happens, but it's rare. Now we hear all those stories, but if you look at the percentages, it's 99% will drop out at one of those founding rounds. Then you move into that growth stage where hopefully people will bring in, or the smart CEOs at that point and founders will say, I need a COO, some chief growth officers that could be that growth engine, and they'll help them get through growth and putting kind of the belts and suspenders on. What does it look like to know when I put in $1, I get 5 out the other side? But that's still different than where I come in. Like I'll come in at the later end stage of that a lot of times. I'm great at scaling. So I've got that a little bit of both. So I'm always going to be out there, like for what I do is true scalers. We're always going to be pushing those standard operating procedures like a growth person would as much as possible, while taking myself and a small team to go try to mad scientist the next stuff that would put everything else out of business and say, hey, come back to the content team and say, hey, we might have a 30-person content team. Y'all are doing great. We've been testing stuff over the last 6 to 8 months. We're not quite finished yet, but we're weeks away from. Everything's going to change, and we're going to 300x the amount of work we're doing.
Interesting. What patterns do you see in companies that scale well versus the ones that stall out?
The core one is something that almost nobody will write about, and keynote conferences love it. The number one trait is an entire executive team and board that asks themselves every day, what am I wrong about? Acknowledging that there's things that they are wrong about that they don't know and that they actually think they're right about. And I just I say that of, if I look back at myself, at any point in my career, there's things that I could go back and say, look, over the last 6 months, here's something that's happened that when I made the decision X number of months or years before, I thought it was the right decision. It wasn't just that I got new data. It's that now, as things have shifted and changed, if I knew everything, I could have known everything then, or at some point before now, that would have said that decision I thought was right was actually the wrong decision. Not a little wrong, but like fundamentally wrong. Because I'm asking myself that every day, and I have exercises that I go through and I coach people through that, then I'm always bringing that into one-on-one meetings. I'm taking that into team meetings and saying, hey, Chris, we're sitting down now. This is how your team's running. It seems like it's going good. You may not be able to crystallize something that's wrong, but do you have any gut feelings about something? And you start having those conversations so people feel safe. And then the next thing that the best teams that scale do is, when things come up that specifically those leaders were wrong about, and it's now they've realized that they were wrong about that, they take that back to the entire team and company and they let everybody know it. Because if they don't do that second step, people don't actually believe that you're open to critical feedback or being wrong. They think you sound like all these companies that have great mission statements and culture statements. Then you get inside and you go, the brochure is not like what being in this company is for. But when people come back and say, look, here's how I screwed up, personal one-on-one relating to this person on the team. Here's a fundamental strategy that I brought forward that I thought was right. And here's what we now know is wrong. And I own that. And I figured that out because this person brought it to me. You've now given permission to everybody that says, no, we're actually open to feedback.
Interesting. And along the same lines of scaling, when going from 5 million to 50 million, or going from 50 million to 250 million and beyond, what are the biggest execution mistakes mid-market companies make when trying to go through different levels?
The biggest mistake that I see, especially as people are trying to scale up to that like 50 to 250 million, but it does happen less than that, is they get so focused on short-term decisions that they lose the momentum that they need to grow in the medium term and long term. And I give that an example, like back to, if you've raised venture capital money, like people are usually wanting to exit very short term. And if you haven't had upfront that discussion that says, before we talk about strategies anywhere else or where we spend money, the only thing we need to decide is how much of the budget do we want to allocate, whether it's in product or marketing or sales, how much do we want to allocate to the next 6 to 12 months of revenue that we're going to bring in, like 12 to 36 months, and then 36 months on. And what I hold people back there is I say, when I talk about like 36 months and on, what I mean is you invest $1 today and zero return on it. Now we can track leading indicators to know that we're on right. But for each one of those later horizons, imagine if you invested $1 million today and you get zero benefit until 36 months and 1 day. Now we can know if we're on the right track. And so it's not like just writing money away. That's the first discussion that people need to have, because when they do that, now we can start to have better discussions within each of those time frames. And it's fine if upfront the board and the investors say, hey, we just want to put 99% of the money towards the next 6 to 12 months. Then that makes it very clear that says we're putting off a lot of this brand building, the trust, the things that's going to grow awareness and help us beat the 800-pound gorilla that's in our category. And most people won't have that difficult discussion up front. They'll just charge forward the strategy, they'll muddle it all together. And then what happens is it's now 6 months or 12 months down the line, and the board comes back or the CFO comes back and starts asking questions. And whether you're the head of marketing, the head of sales, or the head of product, at that point, because you didn't set expectations before, what happens is the scaling stops at that point. The growth stops, because no matter what comes out of your mouth, unless you happen to have hit the bullseye exactly what that CFO or board wanted, anything that comes out of your mouth is going to sound like you're justifying your job, and it's going to sound defensive to them, as opposed to having that difficult discussion up front.
So moving on to, because I love your idea of servant leadership, and you talk a lot about what does it look like And how is it different than just being a nice boss?
Yeah. So for me, I think people complicate leadership too much, and there's 1,000 different names people have. And for me, there is really only two approaches to leadership as a whole. There's either the authoritative approach that at the end of the day says, Chris, you're going to do what I say, how I say it, in the time frame that I say it, and if you don't do that, you're going to be fired. And so you're threatening basically at the end of the day the paycheck and providing for that person's family. Or my approach to servant leadership, which is different than what a lot of the people I've written about historically. And servant leadership has always existed. It's just we had this term that came out in the 70s, which I don't disagree with. But for me, it takes the approach in the past of servant leadership is like a moral based thing. It's how you should treat people. And while I may agree with that, I think it's different than that. I think at the core, it says servant leadership says, I don't hire you to do a specific job. I hire you to help me and the company reach a business outcome. At which point my job should be to do everything I can to help you reach the business outcome I hired you for, which puts me in the place of a servant. That could be coaching. That could be, hey, the development team is running really late and we need them to be working 80 hours a week right now for launch. Maybe the best thing I could do as the chief marketing officer is order you all food and send food home to your families because I'm wanting you to hit a business outcome for me. And so everything else at that point is a flavor of leadership underneath those two. And when you do that and you pair it with what we talked before about being humble with saying, I might be wrong with things, people actually, you don't have to hold people accountable. I don't believe you actually can hold people accountable. So the authoritative person is wrong anyways. When you do that and you set expectations and I tell you, I've hired you for this outcome and this is what we're trying to do, and I treat you right, and you know that, hey, I will still fire you, but I'm trying to help you be successful because then we will be successful. There's no need to hold people accountable. They want to work for somebody that feels like that they're in the trenches with them.
Interesting. And you said every leader is wrong about at least three things in business and personal life. And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so we touched just a little bit about that. The three things specifically is an exercise that I do every day. And I do it separately for business versus work. But like in the morning, because I'm getting ready to go to work, as I'm brushing my teeth, I'm literally going through. So it's only 30 seconds to a minute. And I'm asking myself, what could I be wrong about in the business today, managing my teams today, what I'm having them doing that I think I'm right about, but it's fundamentally wrong. And just that little 30-second exercise gets me start thinking through, as we mentioned, there are things that you're doing right now in your business that you think are the right thing to do. It's not just that there's something slightly better, that there's a major change that you could be doing. And so when you're putting that in place, what happens then is your mind is open to seeing those things, hearing things, making experiments to test that. And so instead of waiting 2 years from today to find something out that you're wrong about, when you change your philosophy and you're open to that you could be wrong, you're not walking into a meeting being like, I'm right. What you're doing is walking in and being like, I know I'm generally right, but there's things that I think I'm right about, I could be wrong about. And what happens is you don't have to wait 2 years to that. And everything, all the systems start to come in place then, and things will surface so that instead of waiting 24 months, you'll figure it out in 4 months or 6 months. So compound that in your business or your personal life or your career, and imagine everything that otherwise might have taken you 2 years to figure out, you figure out 18 months sooner, which means then you're not now waiting 24 months to start the next 2 years. So you're 6 months out. So things start to compound so quick in your business. And I mentioned that the personal life, because I started doing it at work and I was like, yeah, it made so much sense and changed how people responded at work. And then I thought about it. And I have a friend named Merrick First, he's a professor at Georgia Tech, and he helps lead people through corporate innovation. And he was like, yeah, the worst thing that people often do is you'll go ask your wife, hey, what do you want to do for dinner? And he was like, you bring some of your business stuff in. So you start asking more questions when she's, I don't know. And you're testing. And you're like, would you like tomatoes? Because you're trying to figure out, or would you like Italian? You're trying to figure out Italian, and maybe she really wants tomatoes. Maybe that means Greek. He was like, no, she's wanting to go to dinner with you. She might have an idea, and if not, she just wants you to choose. And don't take this in. And I was like, yeah, I've done that before. He was like, Kurt, if you think about it, the same things you do at work, you're probably approaching things with your wife or your kids in the same way, where you think it's the right way to approach those conversations, and it's not. And he was like, here's the good thing is, you can probably ask, and if you ask properly, they will actually give you feedback as long as they don't think you're going to bite their head off. And I was like, So I started asking some of those questions. Wow, that was humbling. But he was right. Merrick was right. There were things that I was approaching in my relationships, my personal life, how I respond with friends and things where, oh, it's not how I was necessarily like intending to show up.
Interesting. You mentioned a lot the corollaries between professional and personal, and are the same principles that you apply to scaling companies, the same servant leadership principles, do they apply to parenting and marriage and raising a family?
They do, although more at that kind of higher level. But I feel so many people they don't think about things. They tend to approach like work just from a business perspective, and they don't think in terms of like skills or time. Like as an entrepreneur and founder, people are often aware, hey, time is the most precious commodity, but they're not, it takes a long time and maturity for them to start realize, oh, there's things I need to hand off my plate. But if you at the highest level start to think about everything of your job at work, everybody else's job comes down to money, skills, and time. And you realize that's the same thing at home. And so, well, it doesn't mean that you just need to buy back all of those things. I run in circles with people like John Acuff, and it was part of some of his book launches. And he gives the concept of choosing things to fail. And I like the concept, but I disagree with most of his like specifics. He's look, if you're making real money, you should fire your lawn care business. And I was like, really? I took 18 months off and I was able to hang around with people that have hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars literally. And I'd ask them questions and they're like, Kurt, you need to always keep your lawn care business, because in their mind, they're saying, look, you're going to have kids. Yes, you buy back your time. You could go make $50,000 extra if you if you bring in a lawn care person, but your job is not to do that. Biggest thing in your life, according to you and your wife, is to raise a good son. And how you do that, you sweat next to him doing shoulder to shoulder time. And he was like, if you're on your laptop, they're going to think you're playing a game no matter what you tell them. But if you're raking leaves and trimming lawns. And so when you start to take those core concepts about how do you approach work and your time and other people's time and skills to home, then you start to go, oh, okay, then I actually do need to budget my calendar based on time, based on my skills, as well as then my money as well.
Interesting. And as we conclude, for someone trying to become a better leader this year, either in their company or their job or at home, what's one mindset shift or practice you recommend starting with?
The biggest thing I can think about is literally just waking up every day and figuring out both one thing personal and one thing at work is who can you serve and make their day better. And so like the reason I've been so successful scaling is like I walk into companies and I'm trying to figure out how do we make customers so delighted in what their experience is that they have to tell other people. If you think about that for your wife or your kids, like it's the same thing. And so if you can just wake up and go, look, what's the one thing I could do to make somebody delighted when they show up at work? That's going to change everything for you.
I love that. I really love that. And how can people connect with you and reach out to you, learn more from you, and just connect with you?
So if you care more about leadership and some of the family stuff, kurtuhlir.com, my personal website, or you can just go to Google or any LLM and type Kurt Servant Leadership and all the roads will lead back to me. If you want things a little more on the business side, follow me on LinkedIn.
Excellent. I really enjoyed this. I love your passion and we love giving back, and the audience really appreciates this. Keep up the great work.
Yeah, thank you for having me.